Welcome to Unlocking Revelation Bible Prophecy series, where we're looking at current events in the light of Bible prophecy. Today we're going to be studying one of those amazing prophecies, Revelation's superpowers. The amazing look at different worldwide empires that the Bible talked about with so much precision and accuracy in the way they work. This is an amazing prophecy because it has a relevant application to our time. And you will see how it connects with our modern day generation. Before we look at it, let's just read something very interesting from Winston Churchill. He said, most people sometime in their lives stumble across truth. Most jump up, brush themselves off, and hurry on about their business as if nothing happened. That's what's happening. What do you do with truth that sometimes is not comfortable with you? Are you going to brush it off, treat it as if nothing happened? Or how are you going to respond? Daniel chapter 7 has very, very interesting truths that I was going to share with us. In verse 1, we find something interesting. Daniel is sleeping at night and he starts having a dream. It says, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spoke and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven strove upon the great sea. Verse 3, and four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse from one another. The Bible is very interesting. Daniel is sleeping at night, and then he starts having this interesting dream. He looks at the sea. He basically dreams of the sea and four winds striving on the sea. And as they strive on the sea, as he's looking at this picture, he sees four great beasts coming up out of the sea, which is very, very interesting. In order for us to understand what Daniel is talking about here, remember something important that we talked about yesterday, that Bible prophecy is written in symbolic language. And in order for us to understand this symbolic language, the Bible itself interprets it for us. So we're going to look at the meaning of all these things. So let's look at the keys to Bible prophecy symbols. The first one is beasts. What do these beasts represent? Daniel chapter 7 verse 17, the Bible says, these great beasts which are four kings, which shall arise out of the earth. We look at verse 23. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. So we are hearing from the Bible that a beast represents a kingdom or a political power. The next symbol that we're going to be looking at is that these beasts are coming up out of the sea. What does the sea represent in Bible prophecy? Revelation 17 verse 15 says, the water that thou sawest are people, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So a sea represents a populated area according to the Bible. Then the next one is winds. The Bible said that there were winds that were striving upon the great sea. Winds in Bible prophecy represent strife, commotion, war, according to Proverbs chapter 1, verse 27. So we're looking at all these things as we study the keys to prophetic interpretation right here. Daniel chapter 7, verse 24. How about horns? What do horns represent? The Bible says, and the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise. So the horns signify kings. And then some of these animals are portrayed as having wings. Wings, what do those wings signify? The wings signify speed and swiftness, as explained in the book of Habakkuk, chapter 1, verse 6 to 8. So those are the keys that we will need. Please remember them as we study the book of Daniel, chapter 7, together today. So Daniel is sleeping, and as he sees this, he sees something very, very interesting that is connected to something that we studied in our previous study yesterday, or rather in their previous recording. What else had Daniel seen of the four kingdoms? What did he see? We remember the statue that of the dream that the king had in Daniel chapter 2. when Nebuchadnezzar was dreaming about a statue that was amazing right there in front of him, and then something happens as he is looking at this particular statue. He sees it was made of head of gold, arms of silver, thighs of brass, legs of iron, and all that. All that is in connection with something that's very interesting that also had a connection to the four kingdoms. In Daniel chapter 7, verse 4, we continue reading. The Bible says, the first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked up, and it was lifted up from the earth, and it was lifted and made to stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. So the first one looked like a lion. It looked like a lion, and as we remember from yesterday's studies, that head of gold was also portraying the kingdom of Babylon. So this one is like looking like a lion and had eagle's wings attached to it. And in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 4, verse 17, the Bible is speaking about Babylon and is comparing it to a lion. You can read that text in your own time. So the kingdom of Babylon is the one that is portrayed here by the lion-like beast. So yesterday we saw Babylon in the head of gold, or rather we studied Babylon in the head of the gold in Daniel chapter 2. And today the same kingdom is portrayed as being a beast, a lion, which had eagle's wings. The eagle's wings would signify speed and swiftness with which the Babylonian Empire went to conquer other nations. As we continue reading in Daniel chapter 7, verse 5, and behold, another beast, a second like to a bear. And it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, arise, devour much flesh. It's a very, very important element that we see here. This beast is looking like a bear, and it's raised on one side. It has 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they say to it, arise, devour much flesh. As we saw in Daniel chapter 2, after the kingdom of Babylon, then comes the kingdom of Medo-Persia. We studied ruling 539 to 331 BC, which is portrayed by this bear, which had 3 ribs in the mouth of it. And it parallels the arms of silver that we talked about in Daniel chapter 2. What do those 3 ribs that we see in the bear represent? You know, in order for the Medo-Persians to be able to establish themselves there, to conquer many, many different kingdoms. But there are 3 critical ones that were very, very important for the Medo-Persians to be able to be established. The other one was the kingdom of Babylon, which Cyrus had to conquer. We saw that in Daniel chapter 2. And then it had 4 heads on it. It also is significance of the next kingdom after the Medes and the Persians. And it's none other than the kingdom of Greece, headed by none other than Alexander the Great, who was a very, very interesting general. So the leopard-like beast that we see that has 4 heads and 4 wings of a bird represents the Greeks from 331 BC to about 168 BC, which is a very, very interesting time that we notice as we look at the Greek Empire. And then something that's very, very interesting is that why does it have 4 heads? Heads in the Bible are significance of leadership. You can see very, very clearly in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 2. Paul, speaking about leadership in the home, he says the husband is the head of the wife. So heads there are significance of leadership. So now it has 4 heads. History tells us that when Alexander the Great died, his kingdom was divided into 4 major sections. Actually, his 4 generals are the ones that basically were able to overcome in that particular state and establish themselves. You have those 4, as you're looking at them, you have Cassander, who took the west part of Greece, which was covering Macedon and Greece in the west. And then the next one was Lysimachus, who went to the north, and he covered Thrace and the other parts of Asia. And then you have Ptolemy, who took up the south, including Egypt, Lydia, Arabia, Palestine, and other southern parts of the kingdom. You also have Seleucus, who took the east and had Syria and all the rest. So that would be portrayed by the four heads. The four winds would just signify the speed and swiftness with which Alexander the Great went around the world to conquer the different nations. Then in Daniel chapter 7, verse 7, it says, "And after this I saw in the night vision, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces." A very, very interesting kingdom that is coming immediately after the Greeks. We know the kingdom that came was none other than the mighty Roman Empire. So the Bible tells us that this beast had 10 horns. What do the horns represent in Bible prophecy? If you recall, we saw that the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise. So horns signify kings. So this particular Roman Empire, as we studied in Daniel chapter 2, was divided into 10 major divisions of Western Rome between the year 351 AD and 476 AD. So the 10 horns would signify that division. But Rome, as a kingdom, started ruling from 168 BC to 476 AD. And it would parallel right there the legs of iron, as we saw in our study in Daniel chapter 2. This is during the time when Jesus was here on earth. Remember what we mentioned in Daniel chapter 2, he was crucified by Romans, and it was the Roman Caesars who commanded and demanded taxes, which led to the parents of Jesus going and give taxes in Jerusalem, and they went and settled in Bethlehem where Jesus was born. Then, as you saw that this beast had 10 horns, those 10 horns signify the divisions of Western Rome. Western Rome was divided into 10 major divisions by what is generally known as the barbaric tribes. You had the Anglo-Saxons, the Franks, the Alemanni, the Ostrogoths, the Lombards, the Heruli, the Burgundians, the Visigoths, the Suevi, and the Vandals. So those were the 10 major divisions. And those were the old names for the modern European, Western Europe names. The Alemanni are none other than the Germans, the modern-day Germans. The Burgundians are none other than the Swiss. The Franks, of course, the French, and Lombards and the Italians. The Anglo-Saxons are definitely the English. The Suevi, the Portuguese, and the Visigoths, the Spanish. And there were 3 that are non-existent now in Western Europe. They were in existence then. What happened to them? They went extinct. And you're about to hear how they went extinct. And this is the Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. So those are the ones that went extinct, which would parallel the 10 kings that we see portrayed by the 10 horns that we see in Daniel chapter 7. Then in Daniel chapter 7, verse 8, Daniel starts saying something very interesting. He says, "I considered the horns, and behold, they came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes, like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things." Very, very interesting description of this little horn power. Who is this? We didn't mention much about the identity of this little horn power in Daniel chapter 2. God, like a very good teacher, starts by introducing the bigger picture, gives you a skeleton, and then he repeats what he covered, and then he enlarges it. In Daniel chapter 2, we saw the kingdom of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, pagan Rome. And then we went down to the divided Western Rome. But now God gives us more information towards the end. As we draw close to the end, we need to understand what is going on here. In order for us to understand who this little horn power is, we are now going to look at the identifying marks. You know, the way the police arrest criminals is to take their fingerprints. So let's look at the evidence that will help us to basically understand who this little horn power is, who is generally known as the Antichrist. Daniel chapter 7 verse 8, it says, is coming from among them. In other words, among the horns. If you remember well, that the 10 horns signify the divisions of Western Rome, which happened. So we are expecting that this little horn power has to arise from among the western part of Europe, Western Europe. Identify mark number 2. In Daniel chapter 7 verse 8, the Bible says this has to be a little horn. So it is not the same size as the other ones. So it's a little horn, and then it grows in power with time. So it's going to start little, and then it's going to gain more and more power with time. Identify mark number 3 is that as it's coming up and rising into dominance, it starts plucking up 3 other horns. And remember, the horn signifies a kingdom. So we're expecting it to pluck out the three kingdoms. And as we look at history, there are 3 kingdoms that are now extinct out of the 10. You have the Vandals, you have the Heruli, and the Ostrogoths. And who pulled them out, and how, and why? So we're going to be looking at that as one of the identifying marks. Then number 4. If you look at Daniel chapter 7 verse 21, we see that this little horn power makes war. It says in verse 21, and I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them. So it's fighting the saints. And then verse 25, we see, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. So they shall be given into his hand until a times, and the dividing of time. So here we see that this little horn power is going to persecute Christians. Yes, for a very, very long time. And then the other identifying mark, number 5, is that this little horn power comes after them. In other words, the division of Western Rome should have taken place first. So it needs to come up after them. And the division of Western Rome was completed after 476 AD. And the breakup of the Roman Empire was around 476 AD. So we're expecting the little horn power to come after 476 AD. Identifying mark number 6 is diverse from the first. In other words, it's different. How different? Diverse just means that it's different. The other horns are signifying civil powers, political kingdoms, and this one is signifying religious and political because it's speaking great things and persecuting the saints. Number 7 is that it's going to speak great words against the Most High. In Revelation 13 verse 5, still speaking about the same power, it says he's going to speak blasphemies. So we're going to look at the Bible and ask, what is the definition of blasphemy according to the Bible? Luke 5 verse 21. And the scribes and Pharisees began to reason, saying, who is this which speaketh blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God only? So blasphemy is a man who claims to forgive sin. That's a clear definition from the text. The second definition we get from John 10, verse 33. The Jews answered him, saying, for a good work we stone thee not. They were talking to Jesus. But for blasphemy, and because thou being a man, makest thyself God. Identify mark number 8. He will think to change times and laws. Very, very interesting one. That this power will try to change times and laws. Which law is this talking about? Kingdoms have always changed other kingdoms' laws. This is precisely talking about an attempt to change the very law of God. Identifier mark number 9 is going to rule for time, times, and the dividing of time. What is that? How long is time, times, and the dividing of time? The same expression is used in Revelation and is given an interpretation in the book of Revelation. In Revelation 12, verse 14, it's speaking about a woman who is rushed into the wilderness, and then it says where she's nourished for a time, times, and half a time from the face of the serpent. And if you look at verse 6, still describing the same duration of time, it says that they should feed her there for 1,203 score or 60 days. In other words, time, times, and the dividing of time is 1,260 days. Time is the same Hebrew word that is used for ER literally meaning a year, which is 360 days. Times would be 2 years, which is 720 days. And half a time would be half a year, which would be 180 days. If you add up 360 plus 720 plus 180, you get 1260 days. And that is the duration of time in which this power is going to rule. But this is not talking about literal days, because remember, we are talking about prophecy. And in Bible prophecy, a day is equals to a year, as explained by Ezekiel chapter 4, verse 6. So if a day is equals to a year, then 1260 days would be 1260 years. Identify mark number 10 is that it's a worldwide power. It's going to enforce the mark on everyone. So it has to be a worldwide power. Then identify mark number 11, found in Revelation chapter 13, verse 3. It's that it receives a deadly wound, and then the deadly wound is healed, as identifier mark number 12. So those are the 12 identifier marks of the little horn power. The question now is, who is this? Let's look at review them again. It's coming from among the horns. It's a little horn. It's plucked up 3. It made war with the saints, persecuting God's people. It comes after them. It's diverse from the first, different, religious or political. It speaks blasphemies. It thinks to change times and laws of God. It rules for times, and half a time. It's a worldwide power. It receives a deadly wound, and the deadly wound is healed. That is the 12 identifying marks of the little horn power that are clearly portrayed in the Bible. The question is, who is it? It is none other than the Antichrist that the Bible has been talking about, who will have a major important role to play with end-time events. So you want to take these marks, identify marks. I'm giving you an assignment, listeners, to go home and look up in history and research it for yourself and find out who this next superpower that ruled the world after the Roman Empire was. And wait until next week, where we'll try to show who this Antichrist power would be. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 10 to 12, the Bible says, as I finish, that this Antichrist power is going to portray itself in a way that will not be easy to be identified. That's why God helped to give us identifying marks that we have right now here. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, still speaking about, the Bible here calls the Antichrist the man of sin. It says in verse 10 to 12, it says, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they received not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this cause, God shall send them strong delusions, that they should believe a lie, that they all may be damned, who believed not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. We need to choose to believe the truth so that we are not deceived. Prophecy's superpowers ends by showing us a history that we studied in Daniel chapter 2 of the kingdoms of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, pagan Rome. And then the Bible gives us an interesting part of a little horn power who has 12 identifying marks that we need to come next week and watch our next series, where we're going to be covering the superpower, the little horn, who it is, and what role he had in history, and how that affects you and me today. You don't want to miss next week. We can close our study here today. Thank you so much for your attention, and may God bless you.